Hello and welcome to the Farming Today This Week podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, invasive species from Himalayan Balsam to the Asian hornet.
They hover outside a hive. The trouble is that the bees become aware that these predators are here and they stay inside the hive. They don't come out because they know they're going to get killed, and they use the food that's in the hive and eventually the hive will die.
And with warnings of an ongoing drought, there are calls for reform of the way water abstraction is licensed.
It's the fact that so much water is licensed for abstraction which is causing many of the problems that we see today around drought and flows in rivers and other things.
First, zebra mussels, mink, Himalayan balsam and the Asian hornet. What they all have in common is that they're all here in the UK, but they shouldn't be. All this week on our sister programme, Farming Today, we've been looking at invasive species. What's here, where, what impact it's having, and what's being done to control or eradicate them. A variety of government agencies work to tackle this issue. Dr Niall Moore is head of the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat, based at the Animal and Plant Health Agency.
There are 2,000 non-native species already established in GB, of which about 10% cause us problems, so they're the invasive ones. We get about 40 new ones established every year. What we're trying to do is prioritise towards prevention.
So when we've got long-established invasive species, like a mink or a Himalayan balsam, do we sort of accept them now?
Well, we don't accept them because what we try and do is we try and mitigate their impacts or slow their spread. It depends on the species involved.
How do you decide which ones are more serious than others?
Well, we have a risk assessment system. We also look at what you can actually do about them. So, for instance, some species, there isn't a lot you can do. But for others, there is a huge amount you can do. For instance, limiting their spread or tackling them on an individual basis on individual protected sites. You know, an example would be the brown rat, which is very widespread in Britain, but actually a lot of its very serious impacts are on small islands. So you can eradicate them from small islands off the coast to actually reduce their impacts there.
So when you're trying to prevent something coming in, what can you do?
We have several campaigns which we currently run. So one is Be Plant-Wise. We've been running that since 2010. And that's to try and encourage people not to dump their excess garden plants, particularly water plants, in the wild. But also Check, Clean, Dry campaign, which is basically to improve people's biosecurity so they clean their equipment between water bodies, so to stop moving things around or bringing things into the country.
What sort of things are you concerned about?
I mean, one of the big ones is the yellow-legged hornet, of course, which we're currently fighting to keep out of the country. But other things which you would be less familiar with, things like raccoons and raccoon dogs, which cause huge problems on the continent. On the marine side, American lobsters could pose a big risk to our native lobsters. And there's a whole range of freshwater species that we're worried about. They've come from the Black and Caspian Sea area. They're called Ponto-Caspian species like killer shrimp and quagga mussels. So, and there's a whole lot of relatives of those that are waiting in the wings to invade.
How much here are members of the public and farmers actually part of our defence?
Oh, it's impossible to underestimate how important they are. I mean, without the public, beekeepers in particular, sending in records of the yellow-legged hornet, we wouldn't be able to mount a response. They've been absolutely fantastic. We also have a network of local action groups who are mostly volunteers who are going out controlling a whole raft of species, particularly plants, but also some animals, things like mink, for instance. So absolutely vital.
So looking to the future with a changing climate, what are the things that you're most worried about?
There's some species which we kind of call sleeper species, plants, for instance, which are on the cusp of getting going. One of the species for the future that we are worried about is the water primrose. It's a South American species. It's causing huge problems in France, and the Environment Agency is doing excellent work trying to eradicate it in England. It's already been eradicated in Wales.
Dr Niall Moore there. Well, he mentioned the Asian hornet, also known as the yellow-legged hornet. It arrived in the UK in 2016, and while it hasn't yet taken hold, this highly effective predator, which can destroy a beehive in just a few days, is still here, with 28 nests found this year and double the number of sightings than reported last year. Beekeepers and the National Bee Unit have been on high alert for the hornet as it continues its spread. Well, now the public is also being asked to be vigilant and report any sightings, as Judy Hobson reports.
This is mostly a frame with nectar and pollen on. The queen hasn't been laying any eggs in this part.
Peter Carefoot is the chairman of Stockport Beekeepers.
We're in Woodbank Park. We've about 15 hives here, and in the height of summer you can get 50, 60, 70,000 bees in each colony.
But Peter is worried. In August, a nest of yellow-legged hornets, also known as Asian hornets, was confirmed just 30 miles away in Runcorn.
If the Asian hornet gets a foothold, then they can easily wipe out hives.
These invasive predators have a huge appetite, and their favourite food is the honeybee.
They hover outside a hive. The trouble is that the bees become aware that these predators are here, and they stay inside the hive. They don't come out because they know they're going to get killed, and they use the food that's in the hive, and eventually the hive will die.
Asian hornet nests have been appearing on the south coast of England for a decade, but they first arrived in Europe in 2004, and in France they have caused significant harm to the honeybee population, as Chris Cornwall-Lee from the National Bee Unit explains.
Between 30 to 60% of beekeepers have had to give up beekeeping because of the challenges. They're highly predatory on honeybees, but we're becoming more environmentally aware now. And we know that one nest will predate 11 kilograms of insects. So it's the impact of this invasive species coming in and actually affecting our natural pollinators who are already under pressure from temperature rising and chemical pressures.
So we've got this Asian Hornet Watch app, which is actually really good, super easy to use.
The advice is for us all to be vigilant and to report any potential sightings on the app called Asian Hornet Watch. Jenny Bennion is from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust.
You can see it's got this real black body and these bright yellow legs, whereas our European hornet has got this beautiful kind of honey brown coloured body. At the moment, the most important message actually is to just be aware. And if you do think you've seen one, then report it.
Take a photo and send it through. The National Bee Unit will come out, validate the photo. They'll then put monitors in place to track the area, find the nest, and then they'll destroy the nest and analyse that for the genetics.
That report from Judy Hobson. Of course, invasive species aren't just animals and insects. There are many plants, often introduced by the Victorians, which can cause problems. Himalayan balsam is one of the most troublesome non-native invaders. It can be abundant on riverbanks with its masses of pink flowers and seed pods that pop explosively. But efforts are being made to control it. Richard Baines has been to find out how a fungus could hold the key.
It came to our notice about 5 or 6 years ago, and since then it has just overtaken us.
Julie Hutchison chairs the local community council here in my home village of Blainfield in Stirlingshire. This small wood along the Blaine Water is infested with Himalayan balsam.
It is killing off a lot of the ground plants that are getting smothered, and it dies off and it's already killed what's on the ground. Then you're going to get a movement of soil. If you get a lot of rain, the soil is going to wash. I mean, it's just a case of getting it up, and the roots come out really easily.
Julie and other locals made huge efforts to rid the area of the balsam.
We started off behind the kids' play park in Strathblane. I mean, we managed to clear a fair amount, but when it's popping, it's just so easy to seed.
The sheer amount of work involved meant hand pulling was not sustainable.
The breast fungus has a two-pronged attack. It infects the just germinating seedlings in the spring, and these seedlings are then more susceptible to secondary infection by the pathogens. 80% of these seedlings can die as a result of the rest.
Kate Pollard is a plant pathologist with CABI, the International Biosciences non-profit. The invasive strength of the balsam has led CABI to spend almost 20 years developing the use of rust fungus collected in the plant's native range to tackle the invader.
The rest then goes on to infect mature plants, forming brown pustules on the lower leaf surface, and these help draw away nutrients from the plant, so it helps reduce the production of seeds.
But are rust funguses safe?
For Himalayan balsam, we tested 74 different plant species, and this includes those which grow in the same environment as Himalayan balsam, and also a number of horticulturally and agriculturally important crop species. Our research found that the rust is highly host specific and only will complete its life cycle on Himalayan balsam itself. so it didn't cause damage to these other species that we tested.
Since 2014, the funguses have been distributed at around 100 sites across the UK.
In this area that I'm in, it's very, very dense.
Emily Wiles is from the Tweed Forum Conservation Organisation. The Tweed catchment on the Scottish-English border is infested with balsam, and rust was first released here 9 years ago.
We're having mixed results, so we're learning every single year about different issues that are coming up, microclimate issues at different sites. We actually get sort of different subspecies and genetically different plants from different areas of the Himalayas. So we have to genetically test our plants at each site to match it with a rust species. We've got one particular site where we have released the rust fungus, and in year 1 we saw a reduction of Himalayan balsam. In year 2 we saw balsam plants nearly non-existent.
It could take many years, but the hope is that eventually the fungus will spread through balsam populations to the point where people like Julie Hutchison and her friends can remove it much more easily.
Richard Baines reporting there. Well, sometimes even the tiniest animals can have a huge impact on their surroundings. Zebra mussels are only the size of a fingernail, but they can do significant damage to our water networks. Ashley Bunning is an aquatic biosecurity officer with South West Water. He's been talking to our reporter Fiona Clampin at Bude in Cornwall.
So walking along the canal here, we're looking at areas in which mussels might be found. So from our previous surveys, we know that there's a lot more down towards this sea lock. And in particular, a few years ago, we pulled up this chain and it was encrusted with zebra mussels.
Really?
Yes. So over time, hopefully with what we've done, we'll start to see less and less and less once we do our eradication programme. But yes, here we are at the lock, and it's a bit murky today, so we can't really see much.
So what do they look like? I mean, what are you looking for? I can see fish down there.
We've got a couple of examples here.
In boxes?
In boxes. So
not
these
alive?
Are not alive, no. These are old samples that we've got. So they can grow up to 4 centimetres in length. They've got a sort of D-shaped structure, and they've got these characteristics, sort of black stripes zigzag going across the shell itself, which resembles a zebra, I suppose, and that's how they got their name.
Oh, they're all really small. You wouldn't think they could do quite so much damage.
No, well, this is the thing. Once they're in a pipework, they will just gather on top of each other and just keep making that gap in the pipe smaller and smaller and smaller, so they can be a real issue. I'm doing some pH testing on the canal here. So we do 30 sites along the canal itself, and what we would like to see for our eradication programme is it slightly get more alkaline the closer we get to the sea lock itself. So I put the bucket in, grab the pH meter, pop it in, and what we'd like to see is around sort of 7.4, that sort of area.
Yep.
And what we've tested higher up the canal, we were looking at about 7.2, 7.3. And as we come towards the lock gate where we've got these harbour walls, which are providing more alkaline, we've got 7.53 here.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what we would expect to see. And that's that done.
I kind of think mussels, actually they'd be quite nice to eat, but they are an invasive species.
So they're a non-native species. They originate from the Baltic sort of regions, and they believed to have come over in the timber trade back in the 1800s. They're filter feeders, so I wouldn't recommend eating them. And yeah, they're invasive species. They can outcompete other native mussels, so they can populate sort of spawning areas for the native swan mussel and cause issues. What we're planning to do is, first of all, assess the flow and see how the water moves through the canal, and then make a natural solution with barley straw extract or something like that and put it in the canal, and that will set it slightly more acidic. So then these zebra mussels, when they reproduce, the villagers won't form a shell, and then the adults that are in here will die off over time.
So what you're doing here is very much a preventative measure rather than letting them get too invasive and then have to have a bigger bill later on.
Exactly. What we try and do in the southwest, we haven't got many of the big nasties, say, that is elsewhere in the UK, so we focus heavily on stopping them getting in, because once they're in, it's very costly, and with aquatic invasives, once they are in, you rarely get rid of them, so it's a hard task.
Ashley Bunning from South West Water in Cornwall there. Multiple failures from the Environment Agency, a lack of interest from police and a woeful lack of successful convictions. That's what a House of Lords committee has found in its inquiry into waste crime. The inquiry from the Cross-Party Environment and Climate Change Committee, published this week, says more than 38 million tonnes of illegal waste is being dumped each year, often by organised crime groups involved in drugs, firearms, money laundering and modern slavery, and it's posing a serious environmental risk. Well, one of the examples of dumping highlighted by the committee is Hodeswood in Kent. It's a story we've covered several times, and this angry resident, who didn't want to be named for fear of reprisals, described the scale of the damage back in March last year.
There's 4 or 5 football pitches, some places as deep as 25 feet, full of processed landfill waste in a designated and legally protected SSSI. I'm astounded. The very presence of a digger preparing the way in a designated SSSI should have triggered an immediate response.
Well, Baroness Sheehan is chair of the committee that led this inquiry into waste crime. Kaz Graham asked her about their findings.
There were reports made by the public repeatedly that were not acted upon, and the agencies who were dealing with them were passing them amongst themselves. It was a bit of a sort of merry-go-round or buck passing. The scale of the issues that we were dealing with, 38 million tonnes of waste are illegally managed every year.
There are 6 specific sites, including Hodeswood, that we've just been hearing about. You want investigated. Do you think the public has been let down?
Yes, I do. Taking the example of Hodeswood, residents there, in January 2020, when the first lorries came to do the tree felling, and that was 4 acres of tree felling. And bear in mind that this is a triple SI site. Residents reported this to the Environment Agency, to the police, to the local authority, to Natural England too, I believe, and the Forestry Commission, and not one of them did anything about it, which I think was really extremely shocking.
You're very critical of the Environment Agency's response to waste crime. And you say that it's difficult not to conclude that incompetence is a factor. Where is the Environment Agency failing?
Reports that it receives from the members of the public seem to be ignored. Secondly, we were told the Environment Agency has the powers it needs to be able to tackle waste crime, but it doesn't use them. They can impose far higher penalties than they do. As soon as they identify there's an illegal site, they can issue stop notices, but that doesn't happen, and we couldn't get to the bottom of why. And the third, I think, very major failing is that they seem not to have the ability to see a successful prosecution to the end, where a meaningful sentence is meted out to criminals.
The Environment Agency might well argue that it doesn't have adequate funding to carry out its role here.
I think funding was something that they raised. However, we had a number of examples where misallocation of resources by the Environment Agency was surprising, shall we say.
Many people will go to the police if they perceive illegal dumping. How well are the police doing?
The police were absolutely unimpressive, shall we say. Our committee really wanted to hear from the National Crime Agency, the National Police Chiefs Council, the National College of Policing. All 3 organisations turned us down. They said they did not have anyone with sufficient knowledge of the issue to come before the committee, which just beggars belief. 35% of waste crime that's committed in this country is believed to be through serious organised crime groups because it's low risk and high profit. They seem to be able to operate in broad daylight with impunity. Nobody stops their illegal activity. And even when they are caught, the fines that are imposed are paltry and the sentence is meaningless.
What action do you want the government to take?
I think we want the government to really take it seriously. It's clear that they're not. To issue prison sentences that are meaningful. Our major call is for a root and branch inquiry into the way waste crime is responded to by the Environment Agency. And in particular, we want them to look into the case of Hodes Wood.
Baroness Sheehan there. The Environment Agency told us last year alone our dedicated team shut down 462 illegal waste sites and prevented nearly 34,000 tonnes of waste being illegally exported, showing that we can make real change despite the challenges involved. While DEFRA told us the government is taking action to clean up Britain and tackle waste gangs. We will carefully consider the recommendations of this report and will respond in due course. This week, farmers were warned of ongoing drought in parts of England. While the recent rain has helped, the National Drought Group warns that the wet weather hasn't yet been enough to reverse the impact of the hot, dry summer. The group, which includes government, the Met Office and Environment Agency, says England will need 100% of its average rainfall to recover from drought by March. Only 2 months of this year have so far seen that sort of rain. Well, farmers are advised to look at more water storage on farm, to share water with neighbours and to check their licences for taking water from rivers. Those abstraction licences can be tricky. The current system was set up in the 1960s and many, including the Environment Agency, believe it needs urgent reform, though farmers can now have their licences revoked if they're misused. That's thanks to recent legislation. Dr Steve Moncaster set up one of the country's first water action groups in Norfolk. Members work together to gather and share information about water management. He told me the outdated licensing system is causing long-term issues.
Essentially, the licensing system was set up in the 60s, so there was a Water Act, I think, in 1963, which established the licensing system. Obviously, in the 60s, people's understanding of sustainability and sustainable abstraction was much, much different to what it is today. And as a consequence of that, too much abstraction has been licensed in many, many catchments. And it's the fact that so much water is licensed for abstraction which is causing many of the problems that we see today around drought and flows in rivers and other things.
Now, you set up this water abstraction group. How does that help?
I mean, basically, water resource management planning and the management abstraction is a very technical business, particularly in the last sort of 15 to 20 years with the advent of computer models that allow abstractors and the regulators to kind of predict the effects of lots of abstraction at large scale. So the whole process has become increasingly sort of technical and complicated and expensive. What the company that I manage does is to kind of share the cost in the first instance, but also make the technical expertise available to individual abstractors. So what we don't want to do is we don't want farmers to kind of go off and spend years and years learning how to do water resource management planning. We would much rather they kind of paid their subscriptions to us and allowed us to do it on their behalf.
Which makes sense as a business, but why does it make sense for them? Because if you have an abstraction licence, you can take a certain amount of water out, you can use it to irrigate your crops. Why do we need you?
Because there's no precedent for removing licensed quantities. This problem with over-licensed, over-abstracted catchments, the agency are going to spend the next 10 years reducing the volume of licensed abstraction. Presently, there is very little guidance or experience around doing that, and to get the kind of right outcome for our members, we have to be in there with the regulators, the water companies and everybody else doing technical work to ensure that their interests are protected.
We now have warnings of an ongoing drought in parts of England into next year. What pressure will that put on this whole system?
Well, if we don't get the kind of rainfall that's needed to restore water levels in our aquifers and flows in our rivers, then we'll see the sort of conditions that we experienced earlier this year roll over into next year, and abstractors will be facing shortages again.
One of the things that the National Drought Group is recommending is that farmers look at water storage on their farms. Some members of your group recently built their own reservoir, which they share. How straightforward is that to do? I'm imagining not very.
It isn't. It takes 3 or 4 years to get a reservoir built, and there are a lot of processes to align. So you have to get abstraction licenses to fill the thing. You need planning permission. If you're relying on grant aid, you've got to kind of get the grant applications, and somehow you've got to align all that so the reservoir arrives on the right day. So it is a very complicated and time-consuming process.
Dr. Steve Moncaster. And that's it from us this morning. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Sally Challoner. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.